Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Matt here, and today we're going to be doing just a short discussion video. On the weekends, I know people are typically competing in some of the larger online tournaments, which we cover and we talk about in the upcoming week. I'm actually pre-recording some of these videos because I'm going to be gone on vacation this weekend, and I don't believe I'll actually be able to upload a video on Monday, so I'm pre-recording a couple videos just to upload here over this weekend. But this was a topic that I just kind of wanted to discuss shortly in a video, maybe get your guys' opinions down in the comment section below. So I would love all of the interaction and comments and basically all of your opinions on the topic today, which is going to be power creep. You probably got that from the title of the video and maybe the thumbnail. But yeah, we're going to be talking about power creep in Pokemon TCG Pocket and what that kind of, what aspects of power creep we've gotten already, what the game kind of looks like now opposed to when the game actually was released just only a couple of months ago. Since then, we've gotten a bunch of new cards, and I do think that we've actually noticed already a bit of power creep. There's a lot of cards that were really relevant in a competitive sense in Pokemon Pocket just a couple months ago, and now maybe aren't so much. And I think that this is not so much a problem. I'm not really addressing this as if there's like a massive problem with Pokemon Pocket. I just kind of wanted to talk about, the in general aspects of power creep and how it's affecting the game already, how it's already affected the game, how it will affect the game, and kind of what we can expect kind of moving forward in Pokemon TCG Pocket in the upcoming days. So the cool thing about Pokemon Pocket is that we get a lot of new cards relatively quickly. I think because the game is a digital card game, and it's of course a lot easier to distribute like new cards and new expansions and updates to the game, because most TCGs are, focused around like physical cards, right? And obviously you got to print those cards, you have to design them. But for the most part, I think that Pokemon Pocket puts out a lot of cards really regularly, and it's really, really fun. But the thing is that there's only so many types of cards that you can make. Of course, if you look at the competitive landscape of Pokemon TCG Pocket right now, it's dominated by a handful of decks, but realistically a handful of cards. And those cards are predominantly EX Pokemon, particularly when we're talking about like attacking Pokemon, right? There's a lot of useful Pokemon in the game that aren't EX Pokemon, but if we're talking about, putting a Pokemon in the active spot and having it do damage, most of the time, decks are really built around specific EX Pokemon, and that's, how the Pokemon TCG really works. If it's not EX Pokemon, it's V Pokemon or things like that. And I think there's a lot of really exciting futures to Pokemon Pocket. But I think, honestly, if we take a look at the cards that are dominating the metagame right now, predominantly Arceus EX, or Arceus, however you want to pronounce it. I know some people pronounce it other ways, but I call it Arceus. Arceus EX is a very good example of power creep, gatekeeping, but also just sort of how Pokemon Pocket has evolved since its release. Arceus does 130 damage for 3 energies. It's a colorless Pokemon. Its attack is 3 colorless energies, and it's got 140 HP. It's a basic EX Pokemon. And this is honestly one of the strongest Pokemon in the game, if not like the strongest Pokemon in the game. When you kind of contrast like HP to basic, what if it's an evolution Pokemon or not. Obviously there's more Pokemon that have higher HP and do more damage than Arceus, but it's a basic Pokemon, which is pretty impressive. Now, there's other basic Pokemon that do more damage, like Palkia does 150, Mewtwo does 150 for 4 energies, and then they have a drawback. Arceus EX's attack doesn't have a drawback. It has a condition similar to Pikachu EX, and that's probably what I'm going to compare Arceus the most to is Pikachu EX. Pikachu EX isn't a bad card. It's just been power crept, and it's been sort of gate kept in a variety of different ways. Arceus EX is very similar to Pikachu. However, basically it's got more HP, it does more damage. Yes, the attack cost is 1 more, it's got 1 more retreat cost, but it's a colorless Pokemon. And it has various support cards that allow us to accelerate energies to it. Of course, Dialga being the main culprit. So Arceus has kind of gatekept the metagame, at least since Triumphant Light came out, mainly because it's doing 130 damage on probably turn 3 at the most, turn 4, and then every turn after that it's doing 130 damage. And what this has done has really kind of stopped a lot of decks from seeing play, and a lot of cards from seeing play, unless they have enough HP. A card like Pikachu EX does 90 damage, which is pretty decent. It can 2-hit KO mostly everything in the format. Something like a Starmie EX is actually really good, but I think a big reason why Pikachu EX doesn't see that much play is because it doesn't have that much HP. We do have Giant Cape, which can bring it from 120 HP to 140, and yes, that is outside of Arceus' attack range, but we have Dialga that we run with Arceus. So when you take a look at Arceus right now and how it's most commonly played, you kind of pair it either in, you kind of stack it behind something like a Dialga or another aggressive attacker that would probably be hitting for like 50 damage if you're playing Carnivine, or even Executor, which could be doing 40 to 80 damage. But for the most part, Arceus doing 130 is pretty important. 130 plus those extra damage modifiers, whether it's 30 from Dialga or 50 from Carnivine or whatever other Pokemon we're talking about, it adds up to be a number value that a lot of EX Pokemon really do struggle with. And what we're seeing right now is that really the only Pokemon or EX Pokemon that are predominantly really popular and really successful in the game are these EX Pokemon that have 140 or 150 HP. So Arceus's damage output, being as consistent as it is and as flexible as it is and as high as it is, really has gatekept a lot of cards that are below that 140 HP threshold. And even then, those decks have to play Giant Cape and then probably play Potions if they don't have another healing card like Erica's or Irida. And that's the other thing as well, is that, of course, we could be getting more cards to the game that support particular types, right? The Electro type is just kind of suffering in general right now. I think that's the other reason why Pikachu maybe doesn't see that much play, is because there's not like a lot of electric type support cards like we do have for, the grass type or the water type, or even like the fire type, which has Moltres and things like that. Electric doesn't really have anything like that. So I don't think that Pikachu is exclusively gatekept. I think there is a world where Pikachu could be really, really good. But like I said before, I think that Arceus is like this next step forward of Pokemon. And it didn't just start with Arceus. It started with Space Time Smackdown, I think, when we got Palkia, and Dialga EX, which are both extremely strong cards. Something like a Mewtwo EX, another great example here of power creep is going to be if you take a look at Zapdos EX and Palkia, because these are two very comparable cards as well. They're both basic EX Pokemon that do very, very similar things. Zapdos has an attack for 1 energy that does 20 damage, and then its second attack for 3 energies. You flip 4 coins and you do 50 damage for each head. So on average, we're doing 100 damage for 3 energies. Palkia EX does 30 damage for 1 energy, has more HP, is a water type Pokemon, so you have access to things like Misty and Irida, but it also does 150 damage all the time for 4 energies. So a card like Palkia is almost identical in terms of its what it is doing to Zapdos EX. In fact, Palkia is just better than Zapdos in basically every way possible. So that's another example of power creep. Another great example of power creep, which is maybe not a great example, but a similar example is Dialga and Moltres, right? Like Dialga and Moltres are very similar cards, but Dialga has more HP and its attack that accelerates energies is guaranteed. It's 2 energies every time, where Moltres you have to flip a coin. But it's a 2 energy attack cost, but it does 30 damage. So a card like Dialga functions very similarly to Moltres, but it's sort of just better. And I think we've already seen these examples of power creep in the Pokemon TCG Pocket, where it's very similar. We're getting cards that are released that are very similar to previous cards. They're just better in basically every way. And we're going to see this very much moving forward. A card like from another example of a card from Genetic Apex that's been kind of power crept is like Farfetch'd. Farfetch'd was originally like the first aggro Pokemon. We have a bunch of them now. Well, we have Skarmory and we have Carnivine and we have the new Sudowoodo, which all have conditions. Farfetch'd just did 40 damage for 1 colorless energy, and then it has 60 HP. But now we have things like Skarmory, which have 80 HP and for 1 energy can do 50 damage. We have Carnivine, which is the same thing. It's a grass type Pokemon, can do 50 damage. And yeah, and I know colorless Pokemon typically are, like scaled back a little bit because of the fact that they're colorless, so they're very much more flexible to be played in decks. And that's probably a similar reason why something like Arceus doesn't do more damage or have more HP, is because it's a colorless Pokemon. But there's a lot of Pokemon that we can play now that are just better than Farfetch'd. They do the exact same thing, but they're just better in a lot of ways. So we're already seeing a lot of examples of power creep in Pokemon Pocket, but it's only been, was it 3 full expansions? 2 full expansions, and then 2 mini sets in Pokemon Pocket. So I think the writing is on the wall that I don't think we're going to see this slow down in any sense. I think after a little while, there's only going to be so many cards that they can make until they start basically reprinting cards just better. And I think we're probably going to see that sooner than later, even though, like I said, we've already have some examples of that happening. And I think that's totally fine. Like, I know it seems bad, but I think after enough time, people probably won't feel so bad if they're, their Pikachu EX cards or their like Wigglytuff EX cards. I think I'm going to put in the thumbnail like Wigglytuff and Arceus because I compared them both. They're both like similar cards, but Arceus is just so much better than Wigglytuff. I think it's just hilarious. Wigglytuff is another great example of a card that was never really that good, but at this point in the game is virtually unplayable, and I think that's just kind of funny. But yeah, I think that we're probably going to see things really ramp up as time goes on. I think that power creep is something that just honestly happens in Pokemon TCG Pocket and in the official Pokemon trading card game as well. But the compare and contrast between the official Pokemon trading card game and Pokemon Pocket is that by the official card game, I mean like the physical card game, right? When you go out in stores and you buy cards, there's an actual game focused around those cards. If you compare like a Pokemon TCG, official TCG EX card to like one of the Pokemon Pocket EX cards, they're much different, right? Like the Charizard EX in the official card game has like 330 HP and does like 300 damage. Whereas Charizard EX in Pokemon Pocket only has 180 HP and does like half as much damage. So yes, I think eventually we're probably gonna, so what we're gonna see in Pokemon Pocket, I think, is instead of in the official card game where cards like rotate, there's a standard format, and every year or two, I think it's 2 years, the cards just rotate out of standard play, and that's typically enough time for people not to feel bad about spending the money on the cards to play with them. Pokemon cards are pretty, in general, cheap compared to other competitive card games, but I think in Pokemon Pocket, we're going to see something similar, but we're probably not going to have an official rotation. I don't think it really makes sense to have a rotation in Pokemon Pocket because there's no like official competitive format. We are getting a ranked mode, but I don't think that that's going to like bring in like a standard format or anything like that. I don't think we're going to have like a predefined rotation of sets or cards in Pokemon Pocket. I think what we're going to see realistically is as time goes on, the strength of these cards is just going to go up and up and up. And as long as that happens gradually enough, I don't think there's going to be too much kickback from the community and the competitive community. It's just going to be the way that things go, right? They have to incentivize us to spend money on the new cards and the new sets when they come out. That much we all understand, right? If the new cards come out and they're not as good as the old cards, then, why are we spending the money potentially or, spending our daily packs or our pack points to open up cards that aren't as good as the old cards, right? So they have to incentivize us to some degree, which means that the new cards are in general just going to be better, slowly better and better than the cards that were released before it. And that's just how it works. But honestly, I think if we wait enough time, if we're going to fast forward like 2-3 years, 4 or 5 years down the line in Pokemon Pocket, I wouldn't be surprised if the cards themselves really end up looking closer to the official card game cards than Pokemon Pocket, the original Pokemon Pocket cards. Like I said, in a couple years from now, Pokemon TCG Pocket might have EX cards with 300 plus HP. It might just end up sort of ramping up to that. We'll have to see. I think the only way that you can kind of get around that is, like I said, to rotate cards. But when you do a rotation, you kind of have to have like two different formats. You have to have a standard format, and then you have to have like an expanded format or like an unlimited format, which allows people to at least still play with those older cards. But for now, I think eventually, honestly, like I said, I don't think there's going to be some sort of a rotation eventually. I think honestly what's going to happen is that the cards are just going to get stronger as time goes on, and we're going to have to just keep up to date with the new cards, open the new packs, and build the new decks with these new cards. I mean, a lot of the cards from Genetic Apex are already just kind of out. They don't really see a lot of play. I mean, Sabrina still sees play, Giovanni somewhat sees play, but most of the Pokemon really don't. And it's kind of funny to me that we've already reached a point where a lot of the old cards are pretty irrelevant in terms of how useful they are and how competitive they are. Arcanine is another good example. Like, Arcanine was a totally fine Pokemon when it came out, and it was fine through Mythical Island and things like that. But I think now, like, the amount of HP it does, the amount of damage it does, the amount of setup that's required, it just doesn't compete. It can't compete with the other cards in the format right now. And I think it's just yet another example of power creep. So yeah, I just think that, we're really getting into it now. I think that once the next official full set releases in about like a month, I think, or a month and a half. I forget exactly when that full set is coming out. We have Triumphant Light a couple weeks ago, so it's probably going to be like 6 or 4 weeks from now. We're probably going to get the next full expansion. I wouldn't be surprised if we really do see a pretty massive jump in power level of these new cards, and basically seeing a lot of cards that are just going to be replacing a lot of cards that happened, or released rather, from Genetic Apex. Really interesting to see exactly how that's kind of worked. And I know some people, like I said, are going to be disappointed about that, but realistically, if you open a card from a pack that was 3 or 4 expansions ago and you opened it 6 months ago, it's probably not going to be as good or as viable as some of the newer cards, and that's just the reality of it. And I think it's kind of better that way. I think that, like I said, since there isn't a rotation, you know, when you go to open a pack, there's like all of the different packs that you can open, right? You can choose Genetic Apex or Spacetime Smackdown or whatever. Like a year or two from now, there's going to be like 15, 16 different packs and choices in which booster packs you can open. And I think for new players, it might be kind of like confusing of like, oh, which ones should I open, right? It's a little bit easier for a new player or even an experienced player to just say, hey, you know what? Like, I should probably just open the new packs because that's where the new cards are. And I think that's totally fine. Yeah, I'll be interested to see how long it takes before basically all of those cards from Genetic Apex are basically unusable. Charizard's really the one that I think might stick around, especially if Fire type gets more support. I think there's actually quite a few cards. Pikachu is an example as well of cards that really aren't viable right now. They've been power crept, but could honestly be completely viable if they get just a little bit of support from a new card or a new, you know, support card or trainer card or even a Pokemon card that comes out in a new expansion. So we'll have to see how they deal with that. But I just thought it was a pretty interesting topic. I wanted to kind of mention it in today's video. This, you know, I wasn't kind of addressing any particular problem here. I just wanted to talk about power creep and how some examples of, you know, power creep and how it's already happening in Pokemon Pocket right now. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I would love to hear your guys' opinions down below. You know, give me some other examples of cards that you think have been power crept. I'm trying to think back of decks and cards that were in the metagame originally. Really, it was like Charizard, Pikachu, and Mewtwo. Mewtwo is a good example as well. We can, I guess, talk about Mewtwo because I don't think that Mewtwo's a bad card. I don't think that it's really a bad deck. I think that originally when Spacetime Smackdown released, Mewtwo stopped seeing play for a variety of reasons. I think the number one reason was because Dark type was so popular. It wasn't so much about power creep. I think it was just that, you know, Dark type decks were exceedingly popular and Darkrai was running around, and it just kind of made the overall meta landscape kind of tough for Mewtwo. But now with Arceus out and Dialga, I honestly... Giant Cape did a big disservice to Mewtwo. I'll be honest with you. 150 damage just isn't what it used to be, especially when we don't have any great way, at least in most Mewtwo decks at the moment, we don't have a great way to like do additional damage while we're setting up Mewtwo. And I think that's really the main downside to it. But yeah, I think that Mewtwo has been a little bit power crept right now. But I think initially it kind of fell out of favor just because it wasn't really good in the metagame because of all of the dark type decks. But yeah, I think Mewtwo is another example of a card that could definitely be power crept. But some cards are probably going to be very relevant for a very long time. Something like a Mew EX could be extremely relevant for a very long time. Even Celebi has sort of unlimited damage potential, so it is sort of determined on, you know, what cards we can run with it. Executor is an example of a card that is still pretty relevant, but isn't, of course, just super well positioned in the metagame right now, but I do think that it's still a really good card. In fact, Executor in Arceus is actually one of the top decks in the format right now. I should probably make a video on that or cover that specifically. But yeah, anyway, guys, we're going to wrap up the video there. I don't want this video to be too long. I just wanted to kind of, you know, bring this discussion out there. I wanted to get your guys' opinions and really feel, you know, your guys' you know, I want to see your thoughts on this sort of topic of power creep and how you think Pokemon Pocket's going to look, you know, a couple months, couple years down the line. I think it could be really interesting. Overall, I really do think Pokemon Pocket's a fun game, and I don't think that, you know, cards becoming irrelevant eventually is that much of a bad thing. But I could be wrong, and you guys might disagree with me, so go ahead and feel free to comment down below. Keep it civil for sure, but talk amongst yourselves. I would love to hear your guys' opinions on this particular topic. But anyway, guys, peace out. Have a good one. Again, just a short video today, a little discussion video. I just wanted to bring the topic out there and share my thoughts on it a little bit. But yeah, that's going to be it, guys. We're going to wrap it up. So peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. And yeah, bye.